Want to get back your weekends on the farm? Want to go on that holiday? Want to do those 1%ers that you never get around to? Well, g'day and welcome to the Farms Advice podcast, where we cover everything farming. Before the end of the episode, we want to make sure that you've subscribed to yourself and this podcast. Help this farmer-led podcast help other farmers do just that. You know, as they say, time is money, so let's get into this episode.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Many of us have those stubborn pounds that seem impossible to lose, no matter how good we eat or how hard we work out. My solution is PlushCare. PlushCare is a leading telehealth provider with doctors who are there for you day and night to partner with you in your weight loss journey. They can prescribe FDA-approved weight loss medications like Wegovy and Zepbound for those who qualify. Plus, they accept most insurance plans. To get started, visit plushcare.com/weightloss. That's plushcare.com/weightloss.
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just $95, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.
Well, Mark, welcome to the Farms Advice podcast. We testing out the microphones and everything. Technology plays a huge role in our farm and your farm, but that's why we've got you on today. So welcome to the podcast.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, Jack. I'm happy to have a chat.
That's good, and we've got a drop of rain coming through too. How's the morning sort of started out for you?
Yeah, we're up to 7.5 mils. I've been looking at the spreadsheet while I was waiting for you to log on. So I'll get an update every 15 minutes from that.
Very white, wet sort of, and moisture in our profiles are pretty high at the moment, especially in our region. But the WA, South A, are enjoying a drop as well, which is good to see. Mark, let's get stuck into your background and how you ended up. I suppose it is the family farm with your old man as well, your parents. Tell us about your journey to get where you are today.
Yeah, I guess so. To me, it's just a typical Australian family farm started by my grandfather. So, you know, the first partners were my granddad, my dad, and his brother. Obviously, granddad's not with us anymore, or my father's brother. So, you know, dad's now at the top of the tree, and there's me and my brother and our wives is the partnership at the moment, and it's continued. We've survived the second wife and the third generation, and still a partnership. So, you know, I guess it's a heredity. You know, it's a passed down type of title. You know, obviously, I had the option that I could have gone away or could have done anything, but as a little kid growing up, you sort of, you know, you grow up on the farm, and then you see that as your future. And I never. The only time I've left the farm is to go to school and to go to uni.
Never really deferred off track. Like every weekend that we had at school was sort of at the farm and everything, and every uni holidays was back at the farm as well, sort of topping up on our beer money. Did you say you went to uni?
Yeah, I did. So as a mature age student, I went at 21. So that was really kind of an accident. I was home.
Nice and mature.
Yeah, I was home on the farm at 16, so me and school didn't get on that well. I love school, I love the friends, I love the sport, but academically I was pretty poor, so it was just a waste of money for mum and dad to keep me at boarding school for year 11 and 12. So I came home, and a mate of mine also talked his parents into letting him come home, but their deal with him was you have to go back to uni when you're 21. That's the only way we'll let you come home. And I was out one night with my mate and we were listening to this third chap tell us stories of his 6 months at Ag College. And I thought, those stories sound pretty good. I'll go to Ag College, and after 6 months when they work out I can't cope and they kick me out, it will have been good fun. And, I got close to 21 and my mate turned up one day with the application forms and said, "Hey, Mark, remember when you said you come to Ag College with me? Here are the forms." And I thought, what's the harm in filling them in? They'll just say no, it'll be right. And then I can tell him, they didn't let me in, mate. I didn't let you down. I tried. But, of course, they said yes, and I went to Ag College. And, it was very good.
Is that Orange Ag?
It was Orange Ag. So, started a 2-year course, and by the time I was there, it was part of Sydney Uni, and they had a third year which made it into a full degree. And, I was really enjoying it and the challenge.
Yep.
I stayed for the third year. So what's
the cohort that came out in era?
So I went in 93, 4 and 5. We were the largest intake they had, so nearly 100 students in the farm management course, and then obviously the other courses at the college at the time. So it was probably Orange Ag at its peak. I remember 95 fellas turning up to the first rugby training for 45 positions. So there's a lot of young fellas there, a lot of competition.
And when you ended up back home working and sort of taking on or running Centre Plus, talk to us about your family farm operation and what the enterprise split is on that.
Yeah, so obviously I guess that, the Centre Plus is the main thing. That's a group breeding scheme that Dad and his mates started, and he ran. So I guess grandfather was a tractor driver. Dad said, they drove just open cabbed 2-wheeled tractors 6 months of the year, whether it was wet or dry. They just had to get over the country. He said he dragged a 9-foot chisel plough around for 6 months every year. And by the time he got out, when they expanded and he was out in his own block, him and his dad used to have differing opinions on how things should be done, I think is how he described it. So he got interested in sheep, which his dad wasn't. So that gave him something that he was in control of. So as a young farmer, he's interested in sheep, and he was interested in, numbers and performance. And, they started Centre Plus, which is a group breeding scheme based on performance breeding. And that was in 1980. So I was only a little kid when that started. So when I came home to the farm, performance recording and ram breeding was a well-established practice. And for me to find my own place in that, when I came home was, I guess, the dawn of the personal PC. So, Dad had lots of paper records, and he used to sit down with a calculator and work out indexes by hand on paper. But, it was my job to get involved in the computer side of it and take that over. And I guess that learning process has never stopped, still going today.
It's crazy to think that's nearly 50 years ago, 2024 to 1980. Pretty early on in the days, and especially moving into the 90s and getting a computer. What were the sort of hiccups, discussions that you were having then? We're probably still having them at the moment.
Oh, possibly, yeah. Very different. I mean, that's, the scale, the first computer Dad bought, he'd spent a bit of money. It was called a luggable. It was in 16-gauge steel case, and you could pick it up with 2 hands and carry it to the sheep yards. And that was a portable computer those days. It was just a monochrome screen. Everything was text-based, very basic functionality, and it had a 20 meg hard drive, which we never filled up. That's how big that was at the time.
You're right.
My raw database now of our sheep data is 300 meg. So, in those early days, the amount of data we were handling was just so much smaller. Now, it's, with electronics and EIDs and auto weighers, every time something happens to a sheep, there's data gathered almost automatically. So that's certainly changed. You never get away from errors as new technologies come along. So once upon a time, all your errors were visual tag reading errors. Electronic tags fix that, but now because you're going so much faster, they're just different errors. With an auto drafter, it's not very easy to pick the sheep that stuck its leg out through the back gate and didn't get a good weight. So you always have errors.
Yeah.
So that never changes. So you need some good protocols around what you do about errors in your data. It's very tempting to
just to touch on that quickly. Yep. Sorry, Mark. Just to touch on that quickly, what do you do with the couple of the weights that get skewed or one gets sent out left or should have gone right? Do you just bring them around again as a sort of management protocol?
Yeah, in the yards I do, which could probably drive people working with me nuts. We might have done 300 and there's one sheep got out there and nobody watched it. Bring them around again, fellas. But it's very easy. If you've got 1,000 sheep to get through and there's one in the wrong paddock, do you just let it go or do you bring it back? And that's...
Do you need to be that tedious on that to see progression or just go back to the manual draft? Is that how you see it?
Well, yeah, for a lot of just about everything I draft on, you can't see. The manual draft doesn't help you. You're drafting on information, not on visual characteristics. So I guess which led me to building my own auto drafter. So, we had access to the first auto drafters that came on the market and they weren't very good. And I pulled the electronics out of the first one we had and put my own in to give myself more control. And then, over time now, the auto drafter I have is my own built unit. So, it's got 2 guillotine back doors on it. So one back door is part of the race and the inside back door is part of the crate. So you've got a full physical separation between the crate and the animals you're weighing. So sheep on the race can't push on the body weighing crate and the sheep in the crate can't lean against a back door that's not part of the weigh platform. And those kind of things. So, the back door in my crate won't open unless the front door is physically shut and locked over centre, which just might not sound like a big difference in time, but that might take, let's say it takes a second for that front door to shut before the back door opens. That's added 10% to the time of every job. So, because I've built my own system, I've built it towards accuracy, whereas commercial systems, their big selling point is sheep per hour. So, they're two opposed mindsets. It depends what you need. I want accuracy. A commercial farmer probably wants sheep per hour.
Yeah. There's a mate worked on a pretty big operation and they were shoving over 100,000 plus through the auto drafters and they rung the rep up and said, it's pretty much had it. They've only had it for, a year, 2 years or something. And they say it's only meant to push through 55,000 before you have to sort of reservice it or something. So you're going to come up against those sort of things, especially for the bigger commercial guys. Is it air operated or hydraulic, yours?
Mine's air operated. Yeah, that was...
Sorry.
Yeah, so that was the paradigm I had at the time, and obviously I already had air in the sheep yards because the ones we already had were air operated. But if I was building again, I would certainly look at the fully electric. So you don't have to have an air compressor in the sheep yards, or all you need is a car battery and away you go.
Yeah, I think that's we've got air operated, but I reckon electric would have been the go. But just the cost, that barrier to get across or whatever. But I think over time, electric would play out pretty well. I had a bit of a cheat sheet. Listened to Mark Ferguson's episode yesterday, Next Gen Agri.
Yes.
He dived into the data and everything and what you've done, but talk to us about Centre Plus more so. I found it intriguing. It was good that I listened. As a group, sort of, I don't know, you'll have to explain it to us really, Centre Plus, what it is and the group activity, I suppose, and why that works.
Yeah, right. So it originally started, Dad had a Department of Ag sheepo convince him to do a progeny test from a stud that they were working with. And the stud had 2 families. One family was measurement-based and one was visual. And Dad bought 10 rams, 5 from each family, and the sheepo came out onto his commercial farms, randomly allocated the ewes and did a progeny test. And Dad said he could tell visually after 6 months of watching these lambs grow that there was something different about that measurement group. And he suddenly realised all I have to do is do a progeny test of all the local studs and I'll know who's best. I don't have to listen to their advertising. And that was his goal. And then he'd heard about this group called the Australian Merino Society, which was a group of farmers breeding together at large scale. And Dad thought, if I could just get access to their rams, I can then tick off all the studs that they've tested. So he was looking to piggyback on work that they were doing. And he rang them up and asked them, can I get some rams off you? And they said, no, we're a group, we're a closed system. The only way you can get our genetics is if you join the group. And Dad was telling one of his mates this at the pub one night. He said, I can't get their rams. That's a closed system. And his mate said, how does it work? And Dad explained it to him. His mate said, well, we've got all our rural youth mates here. We'll have a quick run around and we'll form a group. You get the rams, test them, and we'll quit. So they joined the Australian Merino Society thinking it would be a one-off. But obviously once they tested the genetics, they were so superior to what they were all using, they never quit. They stayed. So the way the group worked is, I think Centre Plus started with about 10 members. Every member fleece weigh and body weighed their maiden ewes and contributed the best 1% of maiden ewes to the central nucleus that Dad ran. And then he bred rams out of that group of ewes that then went back out to those 10 members. And we, as part of the Australian Merino Society, we contributed the best 1% from our central nucleus to a tier above us. And then they sent rams from that top tier back to us. So it was a 3-tiered system. At its peak, it had a base flock of over 1 million ewes. So that top tier was gathering genetics from 1 million ewes across Australia. So that economy of scale gives you real power in genetics. And that, through the 80s, towards the end of the 80s, technology was changing quickly. And, by the 90s, we'd moved across to using breeding values instead of raw measurement. The AMS as a group had a lot of people in it and ran into people problems, not technical problems, and fractured and broke apart. So we've been on our own since 1990 and still operating as a group today, supplying members and obviously outside clients.
When I was listening to Ferg's episode with yourself, it wasn't more so the genetics or whatever, the genetic problems, but the people problems. Why was it people problems? Communication, people were wanting different things, or they were sort of wanting ownership over that?
Yeah, because obviously I'm only going secondhand. I was too young at the time, but my take on it is, the AMS would have an annual conference that 300 people would turn up to. They'd get guest speakers in, and a large group of people said, we want to use this new technology called BLUP, or breeding values. And then there was a cohort, and the founder of AMS said, no, we don't think it's the right way to go. So they split on how should we, even within measurement circles, there was traditional measurement and new measurement, and they split along those lines. And there's still...
It's very sort of...
Go.
Yeah, you go. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we're not the only group that still exists from that split. So like your Merino Techs, and there are other groups that are still operating today.
It's very forward sort of thinking, especially back in 1980 onwards. Is there many other group breeding like this across breeds and also across species as well into the cattle game? Do you know?
We're certainly not far from here. We have Grass Merinos, which is a group breeding scheme set up by Graham Pitt. So it still operates today. It's been operating for a long time. Certainly, thinking back over the years of the Centre Plus group, it was lucky to have the right mix of people. So, you had your dad, my dad, who was interested in the numbers and making sure things were gathered right. There was a couple of really dominant, innovative people. So, people that could generate ideas. As a group, it made it very easy for them to do things that were considered against the norm. So if you're an individual and you're going out and taking a risk, you feel isolated. But if as a group of people, you decide, let's do this thing no one's done before. It's much easier to do that. Particularly, like, this is sheep breeding in the 1980s. You know, there's people, when they joined our group, had people stop talking to them over it. Like, this had social implications. Such was the traditional views of breeding, which is hard to imagine now. That, but people lost friends over how they bred their sheep, which to me is crazy, but it happened. So if you're an individual doing that, you could be isolated, whereas if it was a group of people doing it, it was much easier to do. So it probably took a group of people to be able to easily make these changes to their sheep breeding.
Yeah, and if you want to go fast, go with people as well. If you want to go fast, go it alone. If you want to... God, I'm doing a Fergie where I forgot what the quote was.
Yeah, that's right. But I think I understand the general drift. So if you've got a well-functioning group, that group will make decisions at a far better rate than the individual. Centre Plus as a group decided that they wanted large, plain-bodied, polled merinos 20 years before they were a common thing in industry. So that as a group, they were able to make those kind of decisions accurately, whereas I think any individual in that group would have struggled to come up with that goal. But as a group, they were able to do it.
You just bounce ideas across and it gets a lot quicker. Otherwise, as farmers, you can sort of just dwell on your own information in your own head and making a decision on that. When someone agrees with you, you sort of push for progression a bit more.
Yes,
and where are you?
Yeah, and the crazy ideas get identified early. A crazy idea in your own head makes sense, but the moment you speak it aloud to somebody and they instantly see something that you didn't. But if you've got the right group of people, when you put out a crazy idea, they don't instantly say that's bonkers. They'll go, what about this? What about that? They'll look to build on the crazy idea and make it better because they're a good group of mates, as opposed to what were you thinking? The group had that right mix.
Yeah, I think most of the time we're just looking for that confirmation on, we already know the answer, but we're looking for someone to sort of confirm that with us. Going back to the quote, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to... I bundled it again. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that probably does a lot to your group. I don't think anyone's... I was up Fergie for forgetting his quote, actually, and I was like, I would never do that. And today I've done it. But for yourself, today, probably when it first began, what were your breeding objectives, and are they forever changing with the technology as you look for new traits as the world emerges, consumer needs, wants?
Absolutely.
Not impede on our operations, change them?
Yes, to everything above. So when we started, there was only two traits, fleece weight and body weight, and that was a technological barrier. They wanted micron, but it wasn't easy at that time. The first time we had individual microns on our ewe flock, when we sent the samples away, we had to call them rams because you weren't allowed to test ewes when we first did it, just because there was a bottleneck. There wasn't the technology at scale. And they thought testing rams for sale was more valuable than testing ewes to breed those rams. So I understand those kind of limitations, but that's, so that was mid-80s was the first time we had across-the-scale micron on our ewes. But, we kind of had to fudge the books to get the data. And then, as technology changed, it really opened up the traits you could measure. And then obviously, if we think more recently, social pressures, obviously breech wrinkle with the mulesing debate is now a recognised breeding value that industry is working on. We've just done individual methane measurements on 500 ewes. That's, come about from external pushes onto us as an industry. But there looks like there'll be, methane could be a win-win. Finding those sheep that are very efficient with methane could also be the ones that are very efficient in producing product. So there might be a nice synergy there,
Yep.
but a bit more work to go yet.
So how are you measuring methane?
Yeah, so a group of people turned up here with 12 what they call isolation chambers, but they're just big Perspex boxes, and they've got a Perspex tray on the ground that's full of water, and that's the air seal. So you walk the sheep under the box, drop the box on him, and the sheep stays in there for 40 minutes. They do have a little regime that they have to go through before they get there. So there's hay and water in the yards, so they all have access to food, and an hour before they get tested, they all come off food and water, and then they go in the box for 40 minutes. And the ewes that go in have to have a full suite of personal trait measurements and reproductive measurements. So those methane tests can be then linked back to the performance of the animals. And they also all have to have a DNA test. So the ultimate goal of the project is to work out the DNA profile of the methane emissions of the sheep. And if we get that sorted going forward, breeders in Australia will just be able to take a DNA test and know how much methane that sheep's likely to emit.
At the early stage, will you be making just data records, or will you be actually culling off methane as a trait if it is a high emitter? Is that something that you yourself, but also industry, will be looking at as a culling?
That's a possibility. At this stage, I'm not trapping myself into a decision. It's just data gathering and see what answers we get. And then I will be going through a process with a bunch of geneticists to implement methane into an index, but that process involves all the economics of it. It's quite I'm hoping to learn a lot through that process, and I don't want to pre-influence my decisions at this stage. So I'm completely open from it didn't work and we ignore it to it's a game changer and we have to do something with it. So every option in the middle at this stage is open to me. But somebody needs to measure it. We've got to work it out.
It sounds like you're a bit of a part-time farmer and full-time researcher. How do you manage your time into your enterprises, but also looking to make these genetic gains, farm gains, personal gains yourself? Like, it's pretty hard to juggle all of that, but also improve yourself, the industry, looking at new traits, what we may like, the stuff that no one else can sort of see ahead of us, but you're looking to do that now. Methane, not everyone's doing that or even looking into it. How do you juggle that?
If you ask my wife, she will tell you I manage that time poorly, which is probably true. I tend to become, we'll call it an obsession as opposed to an illness. I tend to become obsessed with certain things, and then I just pour the time into it. And, if I'm already too busy, I just, pour more time. I don't try and get more efficient with my time. At the moment, I'm just putting more time in, which is probably not a long-term sustainable option.
Yep.
Something has to give. So, there would certainly be better people out there than I am, but obviously, I'm a farmer. I don't have a boss. There isn't anyone saying, Mark, it's time to get out of bed. It's time to start work. So, I do have some rules. I used to be able to work in the office at night, and that's when I did it, but maybe it's an age-related thing. The brain's not very active at night time anymore, so now, the alarm goes at 6, so I get up, make a cup of tea, and I'll try and spend an hour in the office in the morning on something or whatever it is. And then, that's that time, and I will have planned, the next day with the staff the evening before, so they've got a rough idea of what's happening, can start without me, those kind of things. Set a calendar, work towards deadlines.
Yeah, I think deadlines in farming is huge, especially for operating equipment, and to have it as a guideline. But you just sort of get the job done, and Elon Musk says if you can do it in 5 years, why can't you do it in one or something? And you never know until you put that deadline on yourself just to improve. And in the end, hopefully you get your weekends off, your evenings off as well, and everything to do with that. Just looking at your calendar, setting calendars, run us through what your typical calendar year is, not to the days, but how does it work within your sheep operation and your farming operation? What's the key milestones for you?
Obviously we started joining, so we join. Typically it's the 28th of Feb, but between there and the 3rd or 4th of March, I like to have the sheep out. 35-day joining, and that's, if I don't hit those targets, then I can't wean before harvest. But harvest has been getting earlier, not later. So the last few years I've been shortening the joining window. We used to, with Dad, it used to be a traditional 6 weeks. We knocked a week off the end of that, so we're weaning a week earlier. It's, a week doesn't sound much, but it's certainly leading into harvest. That extra week makes a difference. So once that's set, obviously I know my lambing window's set. We're tied up every day of lambing, so we're mothering up and matching ewes and lambs and stuff. So every day of lambing's tied up. But once that's set, as soon as I did my preg scanning, I rang my land marking contractor to find out that they're going back to America. So, but that's given me, I don't landmark until September. So I've got between now and then to find a new one. So once, when that calendar's set and you're working your way through, particularly if you're working with outside contractors, the moment your rams go in and out, you should ring your preg scanner. The moment I've scanned, I contact the land marking contractor, those kind of things. Things will go wrong. You need enough time.
Do you have them as a notification?
No, I don't.
Do you have them as a notification or you don't? It's just up in your head.
Sorry, yeah. There's certainly key ones like that. I do whack in the calendar, especially long-term ones like brucellosis accreditation comes around every 3 years. And you have to palpate and take a blood test from every ram on your farm over 10 months of age. And if you forget and 700 young rams go from 9 months to 10 months, radically changes how much money and time you have to spend to do that job. So you only make that mistake once. And then from then on, you whack a notification in your calendar for 3 years' time. So, ones like that, yes, I find it very good. And then you share your calendar with your wife, obviously.
So you can get to all your events on time, no doubt. So you sort of going into lambing and then harvest time. That lambing shortening your joining period, has that decision to have a better start at harvest or whatnot, has it been associated just around that, or shortening your joining period has coincidentally improved your management of the sheep side as well?
They tied in together. The driving one was the harvest creeping forward. We were always the 14th of November was a date you couldn't start harvesting wheat. But we get plenty of years now in front of that. So that was the one. But it's certainly, smaller joining window. Well, I've knocked a week off how long I'm chasing lambs and mothering up. I mean, yes, at the end of lambing, there's not much going on, but it doesn't exist anymore. I bought land marking for it, bought everything forward a week, condensed it. I do spend some time thinking about strategies to make it even smaller. I've seen people online doing it successfully. So it's always part of my thought process. Certainly now we're more focused on pulling time out of the calendar. We used to do all our own land marking, which has, I used to physically do it all, which has tremendous benefits for data gathering and accuracy. But land marking used to take me 8 days. And then, 2 years ago, we moved to contractors. We had to get data contractors in, so a team of girls in to help gather the data, and we've condensed that 8 days of land marking into 2. So there's more organisation, but we've just got to pull days out of the calendar if we're going to keep adding jobs. I did. I was given some advice by a vet/farmer. I think he's still the a vet at Bathurst, Bruce Watt, when I was a young fella. And I remember him saying to me, if something's worth doing, Mark, it's worth doing badly. And I don't know if he was tongue-in-cheek or joking, and the statement didn't make any sense to me at all, and I had to get him to explain it. And he said, I'm that busy in the vet practice, Mark. When I run my farm, I only do jobs that are still successful if I do them badly. So he was breaking up his time on the importance of jobs. If I have to do this job perfectly for it to be financially successful, maybe it's not a job I should be doing at all. So I found that very interesting advice. And I'll probably apply that to my cropping type enterprise because I'm so focused on my sheep. If I'm going to do something with cropping, if I've got to do it perfectly to pay off, it's not the right fit for me. So to me, if you rephrase that now, It's about managing the risk profile. So he only wanted to do jobs that had a low risk. So if you did them badly, they still paid off. But, I found that an interesting take because the normal statement is something's worth doing, it's worth doing well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I took the quote from Barack when he comes to a 51% percentage of his decision, whether it's a yes or a no, that's good enough for him. And I think that's pretty important on farm because not everything's going to be perfect. It's pretty hard to be a perfectionist when you're on farm and getting to the decision to even make a decision or not make a decision is a decision on that and how we run our farms. For your sort of your cropping side of the farm, what does that look like and sort of pastures as well and how like grass management? I think it's a pretty cool. It's cool to geek out on that. I know your handle on Twitter is Sheep Geek, but Pasture Geek as well. You've got some pretty good digit stands over there. They just look like bags of money digit paddocks. Anyway, what does it look like for you cropping?
Yeah, so I think we're somewhere between 20 and 25% of the farmers cropped each year. Quite a long time ago, I got a young agronomist on and said, I've got some paddocks that are probably really well suited to 100% cropping, but I don't do that with them. I've got neighbours that are all 100% crop. Here's a paddock. If you can make that 100% crop, I'll keep you on for all the other advice. And it's probably one of the better decisions I've made was to subcontract that decision-making out to an agronomist who specialises in it. So, they send the recommendations in, I print them out, I walk out, hand the recommendation to my worker, and he takes that and, he'll go to town, buy the chemical, come back and spray the paddocks. So that's worked really well. So I do have 100, paddocks that have been in 100% crop. There might be 12 or 13 years now since I made that decision, and they're still going really well. We have paddocks that we rotate out into lucerne, although the floods in 22 wiped out all of our lucerne. Lucerne doesn't like hot standing water for any length of time. Our place is pretty flat. So we're slowly building that back up. But I do have saltbush stands. So saltbush blocks in paddocks of 10 hectares. So the idea was to have enough saltbush that between the end of joining and preg scanning, all adult ewes would go through the saltbush stands. So 1,200 ewes would go in 10 hectares and they'd be in there for 7 days, move to the next block. And that would give the whole farm a break after joining, leading up to lambing, so all the grass paddocks would get a bit of a breather. And yes, I've been working on some digit paddocks. So as I move into the transition between country that's 100% crop to 100% grazing, so that's up towards the ironbark ridges, which aren't very profitable for cropping. Some of the red country. Yeah, so the idea was to balance out every hectare I put into 100% crop, I'd do up the equal amount of land that would be 100% grazing. And that was just a gut feel decision.
Yeah. Just going back quickly, what is the time in between taking the rams out and preg scanning, just that you give your pastures that space throughout the year.
So that's 45 days is, I think, it's the official term. So normally, so that's how long. I mean, obviously, I've now got the digit, I've got the preg scanning, and the ewes haven't even got to the salt bush. They just worked their way through the digit grass, which is, because it's a bit rank at the moment, so that was good for the adult ewes, but I didn't want my heavily pregnant sheep in there, and I might move the twinners into the salt bush, but I'll back them up with barley while they're doing it to make sure that they've got that energy requirement leading into lambing. So the idea is...
Do you have, what's the idea?
The idea was that, those adult ewes are in that 100% grazing from the end of joining to lambing, and then lambing comes out and they're back out into my, whether it's the lucerne or native grass paddocks or, somewhere that's had a rest, a worm break, that kind of thing. That's the perfect theory in my head. Obviously, it doesn't always work. The seasons can mess things up, and we're all capable of making short-term poor decisions that hurt later on a bit.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can agree with you there. Would you be able to bundle all of your ewes in between that period? Usually, if you weren't running EIDs, you weren't utilising their data coming through the auto draft as well, or that wouldn't be workable sort of scenario.
No, so that's good. I like the idea of holistic grazing or cell grazing or whatever the big mobs, high concentration, but my stud doesn't allow that. So my idea was, okay, what periods of the year can I do it? And then I've set up the pasture paddocks to utilise as much of that principle as I can. But obviously I join and lamb in 25 paddocks. So that's low long-term stocking, which is the opposite of optimal. I've got some paddocks that don't get looked after well, whereas I'm, trying to balance that out by some that get looked after very well. And certainly those tropical grass paddocks are my little spreadsheets, and the stocking densities, they're running well above the average stocking rate of the farm. So they're doing their job.
Yeah. I've got plenty of questions. One I want to answer that I always ask myself is, if you got healthy, or the bigger lambs, should they go on the best paddock, or the weaker lambs, the tail end, should go on the best paddock to get the grass, to get the growth, and the good lambs should sort of plateau or deteriorate a little bit because they're not on the best paddock? How would you answer that one?
I'm going to answer that with what I do with cropping. So, improve.
Pass that on to the aggro.
So you've got all your cropping paddocks and you want to spread lime or fertilise, you want to improve your paddocks, you start in your best paddock first because it's the smallest cost for the biggest bang. So your biggest, fastest growing lambs need to go in your best paddock because that's the biggest bang for your buck. They will grow the fastest, be the most efficient, and be off your farm first.
Yeah.
And,
getting cash flow, the farming.
Cash flows in, but that was the most efficient use of your pasture. And obviously you can keep running down the list until you get to the terrible sheep, and you can just make a decision, these aren't worth it, sell them now for bugger all. Cop the loss on their chin and get rid of them. So there's a correlation between body weight and feed efficiency. So the bigger the animal, the more feed efficient it tends to be. So that would be my advice. Whereas
that's a good one. I might put my head to rest on that one.
Psychologically, humans fear a loss at double the impact of a gain. So they've done experiments. Let's say you're walking down the street and you find $100 laying on the street. You go, oh, you beauty. The next scenario is you're walking down the street, you open your wallet and you realise you've lost $100. So it's exactly the same change in net value, but that loss psychologically is felt at double the rate of the gain. So we tend to look at those sheep or paddocks that we're losing on and want to fix them first, but it's not always the right decision.
I think you've answered that probably not to how I thought it would be, but the best way to put my mind at ease, I just sort of thought to optimize, you needed to get your lowest hanging fruits, which probably is the best performing paddocks to keep them going. And then the higher costs are going to be the marginal sort of paddocks that you're looking to improve, whether it's for pasture cropping or utilising within your sheep operation, cycling them around. Good way to put it.
Yeah, and that came from, so the very first time we got a soil scientist in and trying to do a bit of work, we took a range of soil tests across the farm, and, we go from, Bogan River grey soil up to quartz gravel ridges. And the quartz gravel ridges are, they've got a pH of 4.5 and they've got aluminium under them. And he said, we can fix all of this, but those bad paddocks will take 25 years applying a lot of lime every 5 years for 25 years to fix them. Those paddocks out on the other side of your farm that are pretty good, you only need 800 kilograms of lime, and it probably only needs it once a decade. What do you want to do? And, his recommendation was very strongly just buy the 800 kilograms of lime, not the 25 years worth. So that was, that was where that was obvious, and it probably helped that I had such a range in paddocks. Like the variation was stark. Yep. Who wants to embark on a 25-year lime program? I mean, if your whole farm's like that, that's what you've got to do. Whereas we just found other uses for those paddocks.
How'd you drag a soil scientist? What's a soil scientist? Like a one step above an A grade?
So that's what he specialised in. It was part of those business grant type schemes. So he set up a business advising farmers, but half the money he made was through those grants. And we set up a group at Tullamore, and there was 8 or 10 of us farmers went in. To get the grant, it had to be a course. So we had, every year you got 8 soil tests, 8 hours on farm advice with him, and we had to spend 8 hours in meetings or lectures or whatever. And we did a series of those. So he'd teach us about the soil science as well as do the soil test, and then he'd turn up on farm. And when he was on farm, he worked like an agronomist. When we were in the classroom, he was teaching us the fundamentals of our soil tests. And it's all a long time ago. I've probably forgotten more of what he taught me, but the key learnings stayed with me.
Yeah. As they do. That plays into my next question pretty well. What advice or advisors do you currently use or have you used on the farm that sort of progress what you do? I think there was a figure of farmers are using 14 advisors on average across farms. And it's good to hear like that people are like from the soil scientists, the improvements you've made from your learnings as well. But what advisors are you using? Sort of delegating towards anyway.
Yeah, obviously the agronomist is a big one, and that comes because I've specialised in the sheep. The sheep, because that's what I specialise in, we don't have a dedicated advisor, but there's certainly a cohort of people that I have access to that I always talk to. So I have quite a few, I guess, scientists need access to data, and I want access to scientists or geneticists. So I have quite a few people that's how we trade our time. So I have the data that they can have access to, but I get access to their knowledge. So I have, I've got a few relationships like that, and that's some of Australia's leading geneticists on sheep. So that's handy. That's how that's worked for me. I probably spend more time working now than I did learning. So I think in the past when I was a young fella, these courses and ideas had come up, and at that stage Dad was busy, so I'd get sent. That's a great idea. I'll send my son and he can come back and condense it and tell me what we learned. But then you fall into the trap of all family partnerships where you've got the younger generation trying to instigate change with the older generation, and that's not always an easy thing to do either. Although Dad didn't like his cropping, so anything from the cropping side was easy.
Yeah. it's a constant navigation and probably the biggest thing within agriculture succession, but also communication and that huge role. Was there any other like advisory that you use? Like, do you have wealth planners, financial planners? Like, do you utilize them? You don't have to dive into detail.
No, I shouldn't. Well, I reckon one of the best things that the partnership did. So my uncle, when he wanted to retire, got a small grant for a farm succession plan, and a very popular lady from Farm Succession came and spent a little bit of time with us. And the younger generation thought this is awesome, and we paid a farm succession specialist to come in and work with us. And before he retired, they put together a deed of understanding for the family partnership. So it's not a legally binding document, but they call it a deed of understanding. Everyone reads it, all the partners sign it. I think it ended up being a 100-page document. Like, he interviewed all the people individually, interviewed all our off-farm siblings, asked all the tough questions, asked every person, what's going to happen if mum dies, what's going to happen if dad dies, what's going to happen if this, and we've had a reasonably painless farm succession plan. And having spoken to many other people in the industry, that's not always the outcome. The first one-on-one meeting we had with this guy was in a town about 100 k's away, and me and my brother and our wives went, and he interviewed us separately and together. And on the way home, we called in at a little local pub because one of the wives was driving, and we thought we'd get a couple of long necks for the trip. And while we're in there, some dude goes, I'm so-and-so, what have you boys been up to? And what do I tell this stranger about? And I got caught, and I just said, we've been farm succession planning. And there was this long pause, and the fella looked at me, and he goes, yeah, we tried that. One of us ended up in jail, and I just didn't know where to go with it. So I left it there. I was talking to a mate, and I told him the story, and he goes, oh, yeah, I know that family. That was him. He was the one that ended up in jail. They came to fisticuffs in their farm succession. So I had this story very early on in our process of farm succession planning. It was like, right, there's what not to do. Everything from there up is good. So, we spent quite a lot of money on this advisor, and every cent was worth it. I strongly recommend that to anyone.
You probably don't get the value.
The older generation, well, particularly in our case, thought, didn't see any value in it at all. But, we've gone through painlessly, and, we're probably nearly time to do it again or start thinking about it again. My eldest boy is now home on the farm. So, but I feel like I've only just finished the farm succession plan. So, I guess it's a never-ending process if you are going to continually have new generations coming onto the farm.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's always on the boil. I was going to ask you before, who's involved in the farming operation? You've got your advisors to the side of you, but like direct employees, you got your son back on board.
Yes, although he's not very useful yet. So he's learning the ropes. So there's me, my brother, and obviously Dad pokes around, sprays a lot of burrs, and still does sheep stuff. And we've got 2 full-time employees at the moment, and our wives, obviously.
Yep. Yeah. What's something that you've improved?
Ask the question.
Yeah, you go.
Well, I was going to say the stud business could probably warrant a full-time staff member just for the sheep.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're not doing that.
Yeah. We've on that, we're probably the same. How much do you sort of lose when you're not sort of specialising like in the stud game all the time? Because you have to have your mind elsewhere, devoted to other things as well to make the whole farm cycle like keep turning. And what sort of improvements do you think you'd see off the back of that?
For me, like if I got somebody in that specialised it in, that'd be somebody that specialised into the data gathering and the day-to-day handling of the sheep, and it would free me up to make decisions.
Yep.
So at the moment, I'm doing a lot of that work, and while you're working, you're not making good decisions. I think back to my rugby playing days. Probably played rugby for a bit too long. But by the end of when we were playing rugby, there was a lot of science coming out about your ability to make on-the-spot decisions with a high heart rate. So essentially, if your heart rate gets to 180 while you're playing sport, your ability to make decisions disappears, which is why you spend so much time in training. You want those decisions to be automatic. And I can't help but see the analogy between the farmer that's working extremely hard loses his ability to make decisions. If you get up early, work hard all day, get home tired, have tea, fall asleep, that becomes a cycle where you're not making good decisions. And I probably feel like I'm in that a little bit at the moment. And certainly the staff members can all drive tractors and boom sprays, but there isn't many people that can crank out the auto drafter or gather data on the sheep. So that's still me at the moment.
Yeah, one of those sort of opportunities for yourself. What's something you have improved on farm lately?
I guess the last little project, I've just taken over. The Department of Ag had a smart farm pilot project here where they put sensors all over my farm. So tank monitors, trough monitors, soil probes. And I've just taken over. The project's come to an end. And the participants had the choice to say, thank you very much. They're the sensors, you take them, or I take over running it. And I've taken over running it, but that involved linking all my sensors. I've chosen Google Sheets and written some code. And, so I now get alerts. I've linked it to ChatGPT, the AI system. So I now get these really cool, funny emails as my alerts, which is, it's kind of new and still exciting. But my ultimate goal is to make, like all the diesel tank sensors. I would like to just put a threshold in, and when we get to that threshold, I don't get the email, but my fuel distributor gets the email. So, it's an automated process. I set some minimum and maximum targets, and I don't have to think about diesel anymore. It just, the tanks stay full. So it's still in the testing phase.
I haven't thought about that.
Yeah. So, data and that information is really cool, but unless it takes some of your time and labour or jobs away from you, it hasn't really added anything. It's made the decision-making process more comfortable because you've got more data, but it hasn't made any decisions for you. It hasn't done anything. So that's my goal, is to make that fuel delivery automated. At the moment, I get an email, I think the threshold's about 30 litres. So every time one of my diesel tanks drops by 30 litres, I get an email. So if you get that email at 3 a.m, that's something's going on. So, I do really like that. But then,
you come around for 29 litres.
Yeah, you'll probably get away with it.
Yeah.
I better go and tweak that up.
What other sensors did you get on farm?
A lot of trough sensors, temperature sensors of which are more. So I've got 2 temperature sensors in the feedlot, one under in shade, one out in the open. I wanted humidity sensors in my silos, hoping that over time, if I had a weevil outbreak and if the moisture goes with it, I'd get an alert about rising moisture in my silos before. The idea was to find out where the tipping points were so I could take action before there was a problem. The soil probes, they said they'd put them out. I've been sheep focused. I didn't think there'd be much value in that, but they're probably one of the sensors I look at the most. Answered some questions about some of my cropping paddocks. Dad always says, that paddock always cuts out in a dry season, and now we've got a soil probe down there. It gets wetter to 40 centimetres, and from 40 to 80 centimetres, every 10 centimetres gets drier and drier and drier. For whatever reason, the moisture simply cannot penetrate to depth. So, that paddock has clearly only got 40 centimetres of moisture, and obviously in a dry finish, it's got nothing, where we've got other paddocks that just get wetter and wetter the deeper you go. So I've found the soil moisture probes, very interesting. It's nice to have the temperatures. You don't have to guess if the soil.
Do they help out?
I find the data. I've got one in the digit paddock. I find the data from it interesting. It's staggering how quickly 30 mil in summer can disappear. Makes you realise you have a very small window after a rain. The agronomist has suggested that I should spread urea in those paddocks on the digit. And I'm thinking, they grow like, why would you do it? And then you realise in summer that you've got 8 days of good growth after a storm. How do you maximise that? It's such a small window. Yeah, without the moisture probe, you watch the grass turn, but you can really see it in the graph.
Yeah.
But I haven't actually done anything other than look at that data.
For your data collection, how can we look at speeding up productivity, profit on farm? Because it's such a long game. I had the idea the other day of, if you approach your own farm as if you're going to flip it in 5 years for more money, for capital gain, et cetera, but you don't sell it at the end. You make the farm nice and tidy, profitable, sustainable for yourself. What's a way that we can improve that speed, utilising data from what you have? We probably don't see what the other outcome would have been if we didn't do, like what you're doing, probably sped up your genetic gain, but you haven't seen if you didn't do that.
Yeah, what's the counterfactual?
Different.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So this farm next door to us was owned for a while. He's a lovely neighbour, but that's what he did. That's how he made his money. He flipped farms. And he worked on about that time period for 5 years.
Yeah. And
he owned a bulldozer and a road grader, and he knew how to fence. And when he came in, the farm, he typically bought farms that the fences and gates were buggered and regrowth. He cleaned up the paddocks, fixed all the fences, and swung every gate. Flipped the farm.
That's where he stopped? Did he put crops in, or like
the
first cycle of
no, absolutely.
soil?
He farmed while he was doing it, but his advice was, somebody comes to buy a farm, nice clean paddocks, good fences, and gates that swing. That was his. He was making some assumptions, the fact that the fences were no good and the gates didn't swing, about how the soil had been, he's making some assumptions that the rest of the farm was run down without doing, how do I, so there's somebody that actually has done that regularly throughout his life, and he wasn't relying on data at all, which is a different answer than what you're looking for. Because you're right, I don't have the counterfactual, so I'm reluctant to guess. Certainly,
with the use of data, that's how we're going.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to, the statement before, gathering data to make something economic has to be done well. If you've got poor data, you make worse decisions than if you possibly had no data. So it falls into that category of is it worth doing badly? Whereas I don't like making decisions without my data because I don't like to guess. I like some data, and I'll probably use bad data as well. It's just the way I am.
But it's a good guideline to go off. Otherwise, you're going off your assumptions, as you said. Old mate swinging the gates. He thinks the paddocks haven't been improved at all. But without the data, you've got nothing to go off. Only your assumptions for that. We may have to track him down for a podcast. That'd be a cool episode.
He was pretty old.
I
was going to say he's pretty old when he was my neighbour.
He was what?
He was old when he was my neighbour. I'm not even sure he's still kicking around.
Yeah, right.
But it would be interesting.
Yeah, right. Well, if he is, track him down. I think the older the better. Actually, had a granddad. He's on farm TikTok. You'd know about TikTok being a gamer and everything.
No, I mean,
but yeah, I think the
old school gamer,
grandparents of the world would be good.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure it still is.
That's something for another topic. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm sure he's still kicking around. I'll find out.
Most old cockies are. I put out the tweet and we had hundreds, nearly thousands of farmers ask some questions of you, Mark. But we'll just pick one question for now with Andrew Rolfe. What are some trends that you found that you didn't expect within the sheep game?
Yeah, I think I might approach that from the opposite because I've got lots and lots of data. You'll go to a field day or a conference or somebody will stand up and they'll tell you a trend and you'll get told, trends that everyone accepts are true. And then I'll go home and look at my data and I don't find them or they're not as strong. So typically about correlations, we know everyone says, if you want fleece weight, you have to sacrifice micron. You want micron, you've got to sacrifice fleece weight. So that's a really strong trend. When you go and look at the data, you actually go, there's plenty of sheep that do both if you know where to find them. Or the trend that fat and muscle will deliver you improved reproductive performance. So that's a trend. So if sheep genetics look in the maternal database, which is the part of the sheep industry that has the best reproductive data, they have no correlation between fat and muscle and reproduction. So it's typically the ones that surprise me is where you don't find evidence of trends that people accept. In the merino game, there is a correlation between fat, muscle, and reproduction. In my data, that correlation disappears once you get to about +1 for muscle and fat. So maybe the maternals are all past that. There's odd ones. Every now and then something will come along that'll completely flip your perspective. So when we were developing the pedigree matchmaker system on farm, we had to put ewes that we'd already mothered up, ewes and lambs, into the trial to see if this pedigree matchmaker would work. And all the ewes and lambs that went in had a maternal behaviour score. So how calm the ewe was when we interacted with them. And everyone's assumption was these would be the same animals down the paddock that would get a really good mathematical bond to their lamb through the tag reading system. And it turned out to be completely and utterly opposite. It was the crazy ewes, when you were trying to tag their lambs, that had the best bonds down the paddock. So their lambs, when humans weren't there, were following them really closely. That was something that was completely unexpected. Other things that came out of that we didn't expect. So ewes that turn up to the water point more often in a pedigree matchmaker system have a genetic correlation to a higher worm burden. That doesn't tell us why, but we know the correlation exists. So are sheep that have worms scouring more often and have to drink more? Or is it the sheep that stays near the water point is always eating secondhand grass? So there's things like that that we weren't even looking for until we had data and somebody sat down and analysed it and said, hey, there's this thing here, So once you've got data, you can discover things that were never on the radar. I don't know what to do about the fact that sheep that hang around the water a lot have got more worms, but we know it's a thing. And that's at the genetic level. It's not at the phenotypic level. Yeah, so that's ones like that, can be spent a bit of time thinking about.
How do you actually write that data down other than figures coming through for yourself? Like, are you saying retain your crazy ewes, dot point, get rid of a few water troughs, next point?
Yeah.
How do you actually use, implement, or take action? Or
yeah, that's an excellent question. So that's a good example of gathering data where it doesn't change your outcome. So does it have any value? So there's certainly data on the farm that I gather that doesn't turn into a decision. And if that gathering of that data takes time and effort, you have to ask yourself a tough question about what you're doing. So my goal is I'd love all my sheep data to be a byproduct of management, like my cropping. So I get lovely yield maps with my header, but that's a byproduct of actually harvesting the crop. So if we look at livestock industries that have really, really good data, say the dairy guys all have excellent milk yields from every individual cow, but that milk yield is a byproduct of actually doing their job. Whereas typically in the sheep game, my fleece weights, body weights, reproductive records, I actually have to spend physical time getting that data. It's not a byproduct of management. So I'm continually trying to find ways that technology can get me my data as a byproduct of management. So the pedigree matchmaker system was an example of that. So the user lambs are just down the paddock eating and drinking and growing and fat and happy, and I plonk a tag reader down there and I can get pedigrees, which is as a stud breeder, that's what I'm after. I want to know who the mum is of every lamb. And there's a system that gives me that answer, and it's just a byproduct of running my sheep. So how do I turn other parts of my data gathering into that? So that's where the sheep industry falls down on cropping. You get a lot of flack. You sheep breeders are all Luddites. You won't adopt any technology. But our measurements are not a byproduct of management. So the equivalent for me of gathering fleece weights would be the equivalent of a cropper to get a yield map physically going out and cutting 100 square metre samples in his paddock and then weighing that grain and getting his yield map. Some croppers would do that, but the vast majority of them wouldn't. So they're not comparable. It's very difficult to compare uptake in technology in cropping and livestock because they're not at the same level yet.
Yeah, definitely. And to round off Rolf's questions, have you found a byproduct of your sort of data more useful than your first hypothesis initially, and like the outside value of your first interaction or action off the data wasn't actually as valuable as the byproduct? Do you get me?
I just trying to do, I guess if we stick with that pedigree matchmaker one, I mean, we used our first pedigree matchmaker in 2005, and I've been using it ever since. It's one of those ones that it was just thrown out as an idea that nobody thought would work, and when it did, I've used it every year since because the data I get is a byproduct of management. I just whack them out and I get my answers. Whereas, that's, if you'd have told us at the time that would have happened into the future, one, we didn't even think it would work, let alone be a useful tool.
I think a bit of crystal balling in the past has gotten you to where you are today. One thing within the sheep industry, it's both good times and bad times, depends how you want to look at it for yourself. What's one thing you'd like to improve about the sheep industry as a whole, not just about your operation, but as a whole?
Oh, I mean, for exactly what we're just talking about, I'd love there to be better tools so that, the data we get on our sheep is a byproduct of management, to be able to make good data-informed decisions about our livestock without having to intervene with our livestock to get our data. That'd be great. I don't know what that looks like.
Is it barriers, like access? Is that the biggest why it's not happening?
I think to me, that's a technological barrier. So we're dealing with a live, living animal.
Barrier?
Yeah. On a world scale, it's a small, what we're trying to do, like the market for sheep is pretty small. It's not like the market for an app across 300 million people. So the technology will have to be invented somewhere else that we adopt or adapt, which most of our gains in the sheep game have come through that. The electronic tags weren't devised for sheep or cattle. That was an adaptive technology from other industries. Those tags were developed for warehouses and tracking inanimate objects, and we've adapted it to objects that walk around and have a mind of their own. So, those are the limitations we're still trying to overcome. I would like, and I think this happens to all agricultural industries, I'd like us to be more, for sheep breeders, the competitors to my sheep breeding enterprise and my clients that I sell rams to aren't other sheep breeders. It's other uses for our land. So my cropping business is a competitor to my sheep business. So I'd like the sheep guys to be more combined in their views instead of, how can we make ourselves competitive against those other land areas? Not, I'm struggling, I might just tear that guy down a little bit and take some of what he has. I don't think that's long-term sustainable for us as an industry. And that
it's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and there's lots of issues about labour and scaling labour in sheep first cropping, which we could spend hours talking about that on its own. So we'll leave that one there, I think. Free labour intensive game sheep.
This is nearly our longest episode. You've nearly taken, I think, an hour and a half was our longest. Would be a couple of years ago now, but. For yourself, starting out, might be from your family, your granddad, your dad, your mum, your grandma. What's the best piece of advice that you've been given?
Well, I'll throw this out for the young farmers when they first come home. A mate of mine gave me this advice. He was a little bit older than me at the time. He said, when I first came home to the farm, Mark, he said, I couldn't believe how stupid my dad was. He said, and then one day I got up and I'd been on the farm for about 5 years. He said, I thought to myself, gee, Dad's really learned a lot in the last 5 years. So, and that always stuck with me whenever, I probably never expressed it openly to the old fella and told him that, you probably did know some stuff. But if you're coming home into a family partnership, farmers aren't the best talkers and the best communicators. There's a lot of shorthand, and a lot of that knowledge doesn't get transferred easily. So if you're the young fella coming home, that older generation's been doing it for a while. They've been doing it successfully. How do you get access to that knowledge? It's not always easy in a family situation. Sometimes it's easier to do it with a boss that you're not related to.
Yeah, it's forever ongoing. I was probably the same as your little scenario that came back, thinking that I knew it all, and then now it's nearly 5 years, just on time for this episode. But coming in pretty hot and heavy with all the ideas and no backing. It's a good piece of advice to receive early on. Early on, the better. And what's the best piece of farms advice you'd like to pass on to the same Luddites out there about sheep, about farming? Life?
Oh, that's a tough question, isn't it? I've got to struggle. What's the best? So
you can play it however you want.
Yeah.
You can make it up.
Yeah, I'm struggling making things up. There's no data behind the answer.
But just drawing on your experiences.
Okay. So,
like, how do you learn, or like what?
So, people often say, I build a lot of stuff, I make a lot of things, I come up with ideas, and people say, how did you make an auto drafter? How did you write your own code? How did you get to all of those things? So when I have an idea, typically on the motorbike behind a mob of sheep where your mind's half asleep, half wandering, I make the decision then. I'm going to build an auto drafter, or I'm going to implement this change. I say yes. Whereas quite often, you start thinking about how it could be done, and you don't know how to do it, so your answer's no. Just say yes. I'm going to do this. Work backwards at some point in the future, and I have an auto drafter. How did I get there? So that's typically, and I don't concern myself with any of the technical details about how I implement that. So that's how I build, implement, or put something new into the farm that I haven't done before or even hasn't been done anywhere before. Is I just say yes. I'm going to make this happen. And then, the details.
Yeah, it's a top tip.
You work them out afterwards.
Themselves later.
Yeah. Because it's so easy. So
yeah, I think that's perfect to round out.
Yeah, all ideas are good ideas for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, all ideas are good ideas for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
No, I'll stop talking, Jack. You can edit.
I've got a little.
You can edit all of that.
A little notepad. Write down my ideas.
That's a good idea. Really good.
We'll round this off, Mark. Apologies for jumping over. It might be my delay. My internet's gone down and down. I might have to drag the Starlink a bit closer to the office for it. For anyone looking to nerd out on sheep, is it best to find you on Twitter?
Yeah, that's the only social media I use, actually. So you won't find me anywhere else. It's at SheepGeekCP on Twitter.
Beautiful. Well, Mark, thank you for coming on. Hopefully we'll get a farm tour in the near future. And for you probably don't want all of this rain coming through, but I think it's a bit of a blessing in disguise for anyone out there. But Mark, appreciate your time. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Cheers, Jack. Have a great day.
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just $95, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.
Welcome to another round of Drawing Board or Miro Board. Today we talk brainstorms with UX designer Brian. Let's go. First question. You thought you'd see everyone's idea in the team brainstorm, but you've got a grand total of 1. Drawing board or Miro board?
Drawing board, right? Because in Miro, the team can add ideas now or later. And with privacy mode, we can keep them anonymous until they're good to share.
Correct. Next, you need the best way to explain your idea, but all you have is a few sticky notes. Drawing board or Miro board?
Drawing board, because, in Miro, I could record videos, add text, images, links, and digital sticky notes, of course, present my thoughts the way I want.
Right again. Now, you're looking for a past idea you thought was just genius. Only you could find... Oh, there it is. Drawing board or...
Miro. All our finished and unfinished work lives in one place.
And he's won.
Join over 60 million people getting ideas noticed in Miro brainstorms. Get your first 3 boards for free at Miro.com. That's Miro.com.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
The Real Housewives is a guilty pleasure for most, but if you're looking to not feel guilty about that pleasure, tune in to Everything Iconic with me, Danny Pellegrino, where I break down all the messy moments and behind-the-scenes antics of Bravo's popular franchise. And on Everything Iconic, I also interview celebrity guests like Kelly Ripa, Keke Palmer, Drew Barrymore, Cameron Diaz, and more about their guilty pleasures, their past work, and so much more. So if you're pop culture obsessed and find yourself watching way too much reality TV like me, tune into Everything Iconic with Danny Pellegrino, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
This conversation does not stop there. Follow FarmsWise on all of your socials. Share the episode with your mates. Like, comment, play out, subscribe. But until then, keep on farming, and we'll see you next Tuesday.